Hello, everyone, and welcome to the Wild Card Round Highlight Haven NFL Tailgate Show. I'm your host, Matthew Heiserman, and today we are joined by Josh Wolver of Josh's Sports Report to preview each and every game during the Wild Card Round of the playoffs. Josh, it's great to have you on.
Yeah, Matt, thanks for having me on. Glad we get back to these tailgate shows for the beginning of the playoffs of the 2024 season.
Yeah, and obviously some amazing games today. As always, we will be accepting callers throughout the stream. We will also be monitoring the chat if you have any questions. But I mean, let's get right into it. The first game, and I would say probably the game that's least interesting for me, is Chargers versus Texans. And I think really the Chargers are the only team in this matchup that deserves to be in this position. If we're being completely honest, I really don't like the Texans too much this year, and I think you could probably agree they're one of, if not the most fraudulent team in the NFL. They've won 10 games this season. I believe 9 of those 10 games have come against teams who are below 500. So they
Yeah,
have not beaten really any good competition.
yeah.
Both teams are pretty solid against the pass. Houston is has the allowed the sixth fewest passing yards per game. Los Angeles, I believe, has allowed the seventh fewest passing yards per game. So it might be an underwhelming passing game from both sides in this one. Chargers defense has been amazing throughout the entire year, allowing just 17.7 points per game, which is the fewest in the NFL. They've also turned the ball over just 9 times, including only 3 interceptions. Lad McConkey has obviously been a beast. Los Angeles coming off 3 straight wins. I don't see how this goes any other way than a Chargers victory. And I don't know if the score is necessarily going to be, a dominant Chargers victory, but at
Mhm.
no point do I think that the Texans are really going to have control of the game. I think that the Chargers are, for the most part, going to have the ball for probably a lot more of the game, definitely over half of the game. And I think they're just going to kind of control the tempo throughout the game. I think it's going to be a pretty good win for them.
Matt, you brought up all the main points that I was gonna get ready to bring up. Just over 17 points per game, led up by the Chargers. Defense is best in the NFL this season, and it just shows you how good their defense has been. They've really led them into the playoffs. There was times when the offense struggled, but the defense has been there to back them up. And then on Houston's side of things, the last good opponent you played was Baltimore on Christmas
Yeah.
Day, and you lost 31-2. Week before that, it wasn't exactly a blowout, but you lost to the Chiefs. You're right, Matt. You look up and down their schedule, they really haven't beaten many good teams. I mean, Jacksonville, they barely escaped with a win. They barely escaped with a win against Tennessee. This Houston team has no business being a 10
Mhm.
win team in the NFL, and that is why I'm going to have to agree with you. They're going to be bounced in the first round. Los Angeles will move on past the wild card round. I agree in the sense that Los Angeles might have control of the ball,
Mhm.
but I think that they just get off to a really hot start,
Yeah.
and Houston doesn't have a chance to catch up. Something like we saw against that Ravens game when CJ Stroud was just I mean, I don't know if you watch this, Matt. I mean, first of all, happy holidays to you and everyone watching. So you might have been busy with your family, but if you were watching this game, I know I was. CJ Stroud missed a lot of open throws. I remember there was a 3rd and 2. He just had a dump off wide open. I think it was Joe Mixon had 30 yards to run, and he just sailed the throw by the 5 yards. He was missing a lot of open throws, a big regression from where he was a year ago, compared to where he thought we would be. So yeah, it hasn't been a great year for the Texans. They really struggled, especially down the stretch. I think the Chargers are riding high into this one and riding through the wild card.
Yeah, and I mean, Houston obviously, I mean, this goes without saying, they obviously benefit from their lackluster division, probably the
Yeah.
worst division in all of football. And then I
Mhm.
don't like to play this game of, this team lost to that team, which beat that team and all that stuff. But if you do want to look at it that way, you mentioned the 31-2 victory for the Ravens against the Texans.
Mm.
The Chargers did play the Ravens as well this year. 30 to
Right.
23 loss, more respectable loss, a lot more nail biter finish, I guess you could
Agree.
say. But I mean, if you do want to look at it that way, then the Chargers are all around a much better team.
Okay.
Now, moving over to the next game, this one, I forgot to mention the time for the last game. That Chargers game is
Yeah.
today, Saturday at 4:30 p.m. Eastern time. Now
Mhm.
we are going to the game tonight, Saturday, 8 p.m. Eastern Time. Steelers at Ravens. Ravens 9.5 point favorites. They are 12-5 on the year. Steelers are not 10-7. For a while, it looked like Pittsburgh was going to win that division. Kind of just squeaked their way in there, and then
Mhm.
it started to get a little ugly towards the end of the season. Obviously,
Yeah.
they've lost 4 straight games, and then the Ravens have won 4 straight games. So Baltimore is entering this one with a lot of momentum. The Steelers haven't been great passing the ball, 192 passing yards per game, which is the 6th fewest in the NFL. And then the Ravens, led by Derrick Henry, have the most rushing yards per game in the NFL. Henry has had at least 100 rushing yards or 100 scrimmage yards in 5 of his last 6 games this season, and he's had 4 straight weeks, or he did have 4 straight weeks without a single touchdown, but now he's had 3 rushing touchdowns in his past 2 games. And then in terms of other players, Zay Flowers obviously out with a knee injury in this one, but you look at Rashad Bateman, you can expect him to step up a lot in this game. He scored a combined 4 touchdowns throughout the past 4 weeks. He also has at least 75 receiving yards in 2 of those 4 games. Mark Andrews, he was one of the most underwhelming tight ends to begin the year.
Yep.
He had 6 straight weeks with at least, or not at least, he actually has 1 touchdown. 6 straight weeks, though. That is really impressive compared to obviously how he started off the season. Lamar has had by far his best career year of his career. It Everything is leaning towards me picking the Ravens, and I will pick the Ravens. But then again, you can never count out a divisional matchup, obviously. Lamar's history, first of all, in the playoffs is not really good. Lamar's history against the Steelers is absolutely terrible. So those are two things to look at. And then there's probably gonna be a lot of Pittsburgh fans, in Baltimore, not that crazy of a travel, so we'll see how that affects it. Obviously, the cold weather, Pittsburgh is used to that. So it's not a guaranteed Baltimore victory. Pittsburgh isn't necessarily a bad team. I just look at it as they have 0 momentum and they're playing on the road against one of the hottest teams in the NFL. All in all, that's just not a recipe for success. So I do have the Ravens advancing to the divisional round.
Matt, I agree with your points on the points you made originally on the Ravens. Won 4 in a row, 5 out of their last 6, and their only loss during that stretch was to guess who? The other hottest team in the NFL, the Philadelphia Eagles. One, mind you, they only lost by 5 points, though there was a sympathy touchdown there at the end. So uh, take that with a grain of salt. But my point being, when you're coming off of 5 out of 6 and the one loss is to, Saquon Barkley and the Eagles, you're not doing bad. And in that stretch, they also beat Pittsburgh 34-17 on their home turf in a pretty convincing win. And then they're coming off crushing two teams in the Texans and the Browns, albeit we just talked about the Texans and the Browns not a very good football team. The Giants are mixed in that stretch. So not exactly terribly impressive, but 5 out of 6, you can't really shame that. Meanwhile, on the other side, you're talking about a Pittsburgh team who on the season comes into this game at 10-7, but you mentioned the momentum. Where has it been? It hasn't been anywhere. They have lost 4 in a row. They've lost to the Eagles, Ravens, Chiefs, Bengals. Those are 4 teams that, well, the Bengals didn't make the playoffs, but those are 3 teams that made the playoffs and 1 team that was knocking on the doorstep. So those are 3 hard teams to come off of. So you could say that Baltimore beat a couple crappy teams, and Pittsburgh kept it close with a couple bad teams, and that Pittsburgh sticks into this one. But I would disagree with you there because Pittsburgh, you're right, Matt. They have not been able to find the answer at quarterback. The offense has been stuck in the mud, so to speak. They have been uh, I can't think of a good descriptor right now, but they're sort of at the point where it's 2 steps forward, 1 step back because Najee Harris in the run game was a good complement to whoever was at quarterback in the beginning of the season, and they were able to effectively move the ball. But at this point, Pittsburgh is on its last ditch effort. You mentioned how they're well if that affects the game if it's in Baltimore, but I think Pittsburgh historically been a team, at least in the Mike Tomlin era, since the Ben Roethlisberger era, I guess, is my point really, because during that time, of course, they won the Super Bowl and so forth. They were a great team. But since then, it's sort of been, have a good season, maybe sneak in a game or two above 500, and then usually first round bounces. And that's the way I see it here. Give me the Ravens to win, beat the Steelers in the wild card.
Yeah, now you did cut out a little bit for me there, but I did hear you talking a bit about Najee Harris. And the Ravens run game or run defense has been the best run defense in the league. They've allowed just 80 rushing yards per game this season, which is really insane considering that's not just one player, that's the entire team. There are a lot of individual players who average well over 80 rushing yards per game this season. So you look at that and this game is I don't actually know, but I'm assuming it's going to be, maybe a little bit of snow there because it was snowing last night in Maryland. So there might be some snow there. It's gonna be really cold. I don't think that the passing game's really gonna be working that well for the Steelers. They don't typically have the greatest passing game, the most
Yeah.
explosive offense. So you pair that with going against the best run defense in the NFL, and where does their offensive production come from? Like, I just don't see a
Yeah.
situation where they have very much offensive production in this game, and I don't know if the Ravens are necessarily going to take over on offense, but I don't think it's gonna take much to get ahead in this game.
No, yeah, I agree. The way that it works out is that Pittsburgh is going to be heavily relying on the run game. Meanwhile, Baltimore's been good at stopping the run all season. So it's sort of that, one guy's weakness is another man's strength. And then when you compare that to what Baltimore has in their backfield with Derrick Henry and obviously Lamar Jackson's ability to run, if this is going to be a cold weather game where the teams aren't passing as much as you would see them in the regular season, it absolutely plays into Baltimore's hands.
Yeah, now moving over to the next matchup, we have Sunday, 1 p.m. Eastern Time, Broncos at Bills. Bills are 8-point favorites. They are 13-4 on the year. Broncos are 10-7. I started with the last two matchups, so Josh, you take it away here.
Yeah, I mean, Broncos Bills, it's pretty hard to pick against a guy that is probably right now favored in the MVP voting. I'm not sure. It's going to be extremely close between him and Lamar Jackson. I think they're both extremely deserving, but obviously one can only win. But unfortunately for the Broncos, Bo Nix is not a part of that conversation. Josh Allen has just been tremendous. The fact that we are sitting here and talking about a 13-win team after he lost his star wide receiver in the offseason, he's been working with, I hate to say it, Bills fans, not much. And I think even if you are a Bills fan, you'd agree with me. I mean, Khalil Shakir, fine, Dalton Kincaid, he can make some plays, but it's nothing special on the Bills receiving core. The way Josh Allen has played is just way too good to be first round bounces in the playoffs. I know he hasn't had any playoff success in his NFL career, but I think this is the year this changes. It all starts with a pretty easy wild card round win against the Broncos. The only reason they are the 2 seed, obviously the Chiefs, snuck through a couple of those games, but the Chiefs lost end of the regular season to even let the Broncos in, resting all their starters. I mean, I think 10 out of 11 starters on offense were not playing in this game. So it was really just, the Broncos basically had a free path in on week 18. So that's the reason they're here, the reason they're 8-point underdogs. I think that's just about where I'm ready to call the line. I think the Bills could squeak out a double-digit win. I think the Broncos will keep it close in the first quarter or two, but then the Bills should have no trouble coming away with it at the end.
And you mentioned Josh Allen with the MVP race. Obviously, he has had an incredible season. In a lot of ways, people look at MVP is you put this guy on the Giants or the Titans or the Raiders or whatever you want to put them, a struggling team, and say, how does this team do? And I think he has weapons. He definitely has weapons. There are some solid players in Buffalo, but he has carried the offense. He has kind of
Yep.
put the offense on his back. The offense isn't doing this, obviously, without Josh Allen. He can get you a passing, rushing, and receiving touchdown in the same game. That's just something that Josh Allen will do for you. And then Bills have turned the ball over just 8 times this season, fewest of any team in the NFL. They also have the third most takeaways of any team with 32 and averaged the
Yeah.
second most points per game with 31. Josh Allen's passing has been slightly down this season, but he's thrown 12 less interceptions than he did last season. I know interceptions was obviously a big problem
Yep.
with his game in the past. He had a strong arm. He obviously had a lot of yards, and Stephon Diggs, one of the best wide receivers in the league, but he was still inconsistent, sometimes threw it way more interceptions than you would obviously want from him. James Cook has had 18 touchdowns in 16 games this season, including 6 combined touchdowns throughout his last 4 games. For some reason, if the passing game isn't working, I don't know why it wouldn't be. James Cook is obviously a reliable option in the run game as well. And excluding the Chiefs in week 18, 8 of Denver's 9 wins came against teams below 500. Now, I kinda mentioned the same stat when it came to, the Chargers, or not the Texans,
Mm.
how every single one of their wins besides 1 came against teams below 500. But I don't see this as that much of a problem, for the Broncos because obviously the Broncos, they weren't supposed to be in this kinda conversation. It's
Yep.
almost the same as the Commanders, I guess. They weren't supposed to be in this conversation. It's year 1 of a rebuild with the new quarterback, so the fact that they are 10-7 in this situation is already good enough. So even if they're not necessarily beating the best teams, it still shows that they have a bright future compared to the Texans, who just haven't shown me really anything. CJ Stroud obviously had a much worse year than he did last year. Um, Now, when it comes down to it, the Broncos did play the Ravens earlier this season, and the Ravens won 41-10.
Mm.
And to be completely honest, I don't see why that doesn't happen again in this game. I could
Mm.
see
Wow.
20 plus point victory for the Bills in this one. Not to say that the Broncos are a bad team, but the Bills are just that dominant. Put a team that can benefit off turnovers against a rookie quarterback. They're going to force Bo Nix to make some bad decisions, and I could see this being a runaway for Buffalo.
Yeah, Matt, I'm gonna have to disagree with you here. I think that the Broncos have a good chance to keep this um, within reach. I'm not gonna say keep it in a nail biter all the way to the end, but this game I don't think gets out of hand as early as you might think it might. I mean, this is a Broncos team with one of the better defenses in all of the NFL. You're talking about Pat Surtain, who has a good case for Defensive Player of the Year, absolute lockdown corner, probably the best in the league this season. So he'll be on the back end guarding whatever deep balls Josh Allen is going to try and toss his way. And then I think that Bo Nix is going to be riding off of a lot of adrenaline. There's a chance he makes rookie mistakes, but they play in cold weather. I think they're going to be ready for Buffalo. Uh, sure, the Bills have won 13 games and the Broncos just barely made it into the playoffs, but I think their defense has the tools to keep it close enough to the point where it's not getting out of hand early. I think this could be a one-score game at the finish.
Moving over to our next game, this game is obviously means a lot to me. We have one game before the Commanders
Mm.
and Buccaneers game. This game also means a lot to me though because I, as a Commanders fan, don't like to see the Eagles succeed in basically anything, and they are playing the Packers on Sunday, 4:30 p.m. Eastern Time. Eagles 4.5 point favorites. Packers are 11-6. Eagles are 14-3. Kinda surprises me that the Eagles have 3 more wins than the Packers. I mean, not surprises me because 'cause they've been a great team, but it feels like they're a lot more even than the record shows. It feels like you put these teams together 100 times, it might be a 50-50 outcome. I mean, these teams are very, very similar, and they played in Brazil week 1, second game of the NFL season. Extremely close ending, came down to a Malik Willis attempted Hail Mary at the end, I believe. Christian Watson is out with a knee injury for the Packers in this one, but the Eagles are on a roll. They've won 12 of their last 13 games. Their one loss obviously came against my Commanders. And then they've averaged 179 rushing yards per game this season, which is the second most in the NFL. They allow just 174 passing yards per game, which is the fewest in the league, and 18 points per game, which is the second fewest in the league behind the Chargers, who we already mentioned earlier in this episode. Saquon Barkley, I don't really have to get into him. we've already talked more in depth in other episodes, naming stats or talking about how good he has been, it doesn't do it justice. I mean, he has been an absolutely incredible player this season. I mean, if he gets 100 scrimmage yards, no touchdowns, that's an underwhelming game for Saquon Barkley. I mean, at this point, we're kind of expecting 150 scrimmage yards, 1 to 2 touchdowns for him. He has been an absolute beast, getting involved both in the rushing game and in the receiving game this season. A.J. Brown has a receiving touchdown in his past 3 games. This might be the most exciting game during Wild Card Weekend, in my opinion, and I honestly, as I mentioned earlier, with that, 50-50 thing, I could see it going either way, but I'm leaning towards the Eagles in this one.
Yeah, man, I'm excited for this one. I agree with you. There's going to be a lot of fireworks in this one. And you brought up earlier the point in the NFL Brazil game Packers, Eagles, week one, first Friday of the whatever. But what I got to say to you is that I think these are two completely different teams. And I don't think
Mhm.
there's even an argument that they are even close to where they are. You're talking about Malik Willis quarterbacking for the Packers. I think that says enough about being a different team. And then for the Eagles, they had
Or
no
or
identity
just
in the beginning of the season.
Mhm.
And
I do just wanna add real quick, Jordan Love did play for, like, 99% of that game, he just got hurt on, like, second to last play or something.
yeah, yeah. So he played at the beginning of the year, excuse me, the beginning of the game, and then got hurt. I mean, that turf was terrible if you watch that game. But yeah, but also the Eagles were on the hot seat. They were beating the Saints by 3. They were losing to the Falcons, blown out by the Buccaneers, barely beating the Browns, like squeaking by these bad teams at the beginning of the year. Now you come to a point where they have won 12 out of their last 13 games. The Eagles have been dominating on their road to the playoffs. Their one loss, you mentioned it, to your Commanders, who will break down in just a couple seconds here. Also, we want to hear your thoughts if you are in the chat. Make sure to call in, send us a chat. We'd love to hear from you, get your opinions on this. But I am going to take the Eagles in an
Mhm.
extremely
Yeah.
interesting game. I think Saquon Barkley has another MVP type performance. Obviously, the way the modern NFL is, he's not going to win that award, but he has been playing close enough to it. I think if he plays last week against the Giants, he breaks Dickerson's rushing record, but obviously they're going to sit their starters to keep him healthy for the playoffs. So he's coming off 2 weeks of rest. He's going to have those legs healthier than ever. I think Jalen Hurts will be able to perform well when the lights are the brightest. He just took his team to the Super Bowl 2 years ago. I think, but that is not to discredit the way that the Packers are going to play. I think Josh Jacobs won't do as well as Saquon Barkley, but I think he's going to come close to matching him because Josh Jacobs has played extremely well this season since
Mhm.
coming
Yeah.
over from Las Vegas. I think he is a huge part of the Packers offense. Jordan Love should have a big game. This should be extremely interesting. I agree. I think this is going to be the closest game out of all the wild card ones coming up this weekend. But if I had to pick, I'll go with the Fly Eagles fly.
Now, Philly's been really unpredictable in the playoffs recently, and I say recently, like, the past few years.
Yeah.
I mean, at least in the Jalen Hurts era, I would say they obviously
Hmm.
made the Super Bowl 2 years ago against the, Chiefs, and then they lost in the first round, 17-point loss. I don't know if that was the exact number, 9-point loss, I don't know, something around that range to the Buccaneers in the
Yeah.
first round.
It was
So I
seven.
don't really know what to expect from them. I think that the Packers are gonna have a really good passing game despite the Eagles having the best passing defense in the NFL. We saw how involved Jaden Reed did get in Brazil earlier this year. I'm expecting a similar kind of game from what we saw there in terms of the Packers' offensive production. Jordan Love has been amazing this year, especially since he's come back from that injury. Should be a really exciting matchup nonetheless. Now moving over, this is the game I was talking about earlier.
Hmm.
Um, Commanders at Buccaneers. Buccaneers 3.5 point favorites. Commanders 12-5. Buccaneers 10-7. Also somewhat benefited off of an easy division. Obviously, the Falcons are a solid team, but no other above 500 teams in their division. Two of the worst teams in football in their division as well, the NFC South. This game Sunday, 8 p.m. Eastern Time. Josh, I have a lot to say here. I'm gonna let you start it off, and then I'll kind of just piggyback, add some stuff after you go.
Well, Matt, congrats to your Commanders on a job well done. You've got your franchise quarterback, something that I cannot say at the current moment. The Commanders, I mean, uh, you watched every single game this season, so what a ride it's been from the three losses in the middle of the season, scraping by against the Saints, the Hail Mary against the Bears, uh, destroying the Panthers with Marcus Mariota, destroying the Cardinals. I mean, wow. I mean, you should be proud of this Commanders team, but a Commanders team that lost 37-20 earlier this season against the Buccaneers, but that was back in week 1. It was Jaden Daniels' first start in the National Football League, which is why I say don't take that score as much as some people would like to, as much as some people would tell you that look how they played when they were both playing earlier in the season. Jaden Daniels' first career game, Baker Mayfield, the vibes were high in Tampa, but now the Commanders are going to go into Tampa Bay, and they're going to win a playoff game for the first time since the Taylor Heineke 2020 season against who? These Tampa Bay Buccaneers. Give me the Washington Commanders led by star rookie quarterback Jaden Daniels. Matt, I'm sure you could tell me all about him, but for now, I want to look at the Tampa Bay side of things. So you're talking about Baker Mayfield and a Bucks team coming in winning they were on a roll to finish the season. Since November 24th, they have lost one game, and it has helped them to come to a 10-win season, winning the NFC South, another pretty weak division. They had a couple blowout wins there at the end of the season against some not so great teams, but they had a blowout win against the Chargers. They beat them 40-17. So the Buccaneers have had some great weeks, and then they've blown out the Panthers, and they've also lost to a banged up 49ers team. They've lost to the Falcons. So
Mhm.
this is an inconsistent team. This is a team that can put up 51 or struggle to put up 20 in certain weeks. So I think that the Commanders will be able to take advantage of it. I think Jaden Daniels comes out and balls out in his first ever NFL playoff game. But I am super excited to hear what you have to say about the Commanders.
Yeah, I mean, first of all, I just want to start by mentioning that that first game doesn't mean anything. I mean, we talked about the first game, obviously, for the Eagles and Packers. I think the difference here is that those teams haven't changed too much throughout the season, but
Right.
compared to what we saw from them that night.
It was a culture change.
Yeah, the Commanders, I mean, they're a completely different team right now. When I was watching that game, after the game specifically, I was kinda sitting there like, "Okay, we have a good quarterback, at least based on what I saw from some stuff that game. It looks like he'll be alright in the NFL, but this is just gonna be another year of losing. We start with a 17-point loss. I don't expect anything other than that." That
Hmm.
kind of, stayed when we beat the, that thought stayed when we beat the Giants by 3
Yeah.
points on all field goals in week 2, and then
Yeah.
it kinda took over week 3, against Cincinnati, and from there, it's just been a
Mhm.
ride that I can't really explain. I mean, I still don't know how we're here in this situation, but, I mean, obviously, this is going to be a massive game, and you talked about the, Taylor Heineke game earlier. The last Washington playoff victory was actually not in that Taylor Heineke game. We did end up losing that one, but our last victory, which was about a decade ago, I think, came against the Buccaneers. So we do have a good history with the Buccaneers in the playoffs. Um, you sounded pretty confident about the Commanders. I have to be realistic, and I'm not that confident. I would much
Mhm.
rather have played the Rams in this situation. That's not to say that the Commanders can't win this game, but I would have much rather played the Rams in this situation. And the Buccaneers are a really, really legit team. They can beat they're one of the few teams that I'm confident can beat the Lions, can beat the Bills. You know, they can really hang with, without a doubt, the best teams in the NFL. They're 6-1 since Mike Evans returned from that hamstring injury that he had against the Ravens earlier this year, and Marshawn Lattimore is not 100% healthy. We obviously know that history between Mike Evans and Marshawn Lattimore. They have a really deep history. Lattimore's actually performed really well against Mike Evans, though. In the past, he's contained Mike Evans extremely well. The previous times that they've met, they've gotten into many fights. We could see some chirping back and forth this game. Obviously, that is to be expected whenever they play each other. But I think that Mike Evans is going to maybe not destroy, but make fun of Marshawn Lattimore in this game. Embarrass Marshawn Lattimore because he's not fully healthy. He's still dealing with that hamstring injury, and Mike Evans is having one of the best years of his career. In a Hall of Fame career, that's obviously saying something. Washington allowed the third most rushing yards per game this season, and Bucky Irving has averaged 88 rushing yards per game throughout his past 8 games. That is not a favorable matchup. He has obviously stepped up big time. We thought it was going to be the Rashad White show heading into this year. It's really been the Bucky Irving show, at least during the second half of the year. And talking about that bad run defense for the Commanders, Jonathan Allen and Daron Payne have been massive disappointments, especially compared to how much they're getting paid. Daron Payne, 4 year, $90 million, and then I think Jonathan Allen around $72 million. I don't know if that number is exactly correct. I do have to double check that, but they are some of the highest paid defensive linemen in the league for very minimal production this season. Obviously, Allen did get injured. He's played like 6, 7 games, hasn't done anything in those 6, 7 games. And Deron Payne this season has just kind of been an overall mess. It's been a ugly performance for him. This might be his last game as a Commander if we do lose. And if we do win, I'd expect the playoffs still to be maybe his last game as a Commander whenever we do go down, because I don't know if he's coming back next season. Washington's last 3 games have all been decided by a game-winning drive. Those games came against the Cowboys with Trey Lance, the
Mm.
Falcons with Michael Penix, who was making his third career start, and then the Eagles with Kenny Pickett. Those outcomes are way too close for comfort considering who we were playing in those games. And then the game before that, we were
Yep.
playing the Saints, and that was obviously the Saints had a chance to get the game-winning drive, clock malfunction. I'm sure you saw that. Spencer Rattler in that game. How are these all one possession games against backup quarterbacks
Yep.
and rookie quarterbacks who have barely played? That's concerning. And that's not gonna the one common theme is that we got off to a we were down to start each one of those games. The other team got off to a lead in every single one of those games. And if the Buccaneers get to a lead, we're not coming back against Baker Mayfield, who's having a career year. The Bucks aren't going to allow us to come back, so that obviously is a bit worrisome. We have to get off to a hot start. And then according to PFF, Jaden Daniels has scrambled 75 times this season, which is 25 times more than the next player on the list, Bo Nix, who has scrambled 50 times. Obviously, rookies tend to scramble a lot more, but 75 times is still way too many. And then when you look at the Bucks, they have the third highest blitz percentage of any NFL team this season. They blitz over 34% of the time. So they are going to be blitzing the rookie Jaden Daniels a lot in this game. And quite frankly, I'm not sure that Jaden's going to be able to exploit that blitz too well, because he has been scrambling a lot, which is obviously not necessarily what you want to see. It's expected from a rookie quarterback, but it's not necessarily the most mature thing to do, not the best thing that you'd want to see out of him. So they are going to be sending the blitz a lot in this game. And then Jalen McMillan, 7 touchdowns in his past 5 games. He has emerged as a great wide receiver too, behind Mike Evans, obviously. Washington has been quite effective on the ground this season, averaging 154 rushing yards per game. However, Tampa Bay has also been extremely solid against the run. They've allowed just 98 rushing yards per game. So even one of our best assets, our run game, could potentially be getting shut down by the Buccaneers in this one. I want to pick the Commanders, and I'm rooting for the Commanders. I do have hope that we can pull off the victory, but I'm not confident. And I'm going to go with the Buccaneers. I don't think this is necessarily our year. We've already exceeded expectations times 10. We weren't supposed to be in this situation. We weren't supposed to have, at a minimum, 8 wins. We weren't supposed to, even be in this category of a solid playoff team, and it's not gonna happen on year 1. It's maybe a playoff win could happen on year 1, but we're not gonna see a big run from the Commanders on year 1. That's just not gonna happen. The future is bright in Washington, but I don't see a crazy outcome in this one for the Commanders.
Yeah, Matt, I think you brought up some great points at why Washington has been struggling. But when I look up and down the Tampa Bay Buccaneers schedule, I notice that they haven't really beaten a good team. I mean,
Neither is
sure,
Washington. They've beaten a few good teams, but
they've beaten a few good teams. They beat the early season Eagles, and yeah, they beat the Chargers, but they've had one of the easier strengths of schedule in all of football. They have had an above average, they've had the 13th easiest schedule out of 32 teams this season.
Mhm,
And so this Buccaneers team, I mean, when I look up and down their schedule, they're losing to Dallas. Las Vegas kept it close. The Saints kept it close in week 18. The Panthers
mhm,
forced them to overtime. The 49ers, the crippled 49ers beat them. The Falcons beat them. The Ravens crushed them. The Chiefs beat them. The Falcons beat them, right? So this is a Buccaneers team extremely inconsistent. But then you look back on it and whoa, they beat the Lions. So
mhm.
you don't know what you're going to get. I agree Tampa Bay has a big time offense with some big time players. Mike Evans with another 1,000-yard season to extend that streak. Obviously, a first ballot Hall of Famer. So that's a great thing to see. Yeah, I think that it's going to be an extremely interesting matchup that you mentioned with Marshawn Lattimore. But can Washington stop the run is going to be the biggest thing. You mentioned the D line struggles for them this season. Bucky Irving's first playoff game. Let's see how he pairs with Rashad White in that Tampa Bay backfield.
Yeah, and obviously this doesn't have the biggest effect. Washington did have the fewest miles traveled of any team this season, I believe. In terms of their schedule, they are going to be on the road in this one at Raymond James Stadium. A solid flight to uh to Tampa Bay. Definitely some mixed weather compared to what we've been getting in Washington a lot. So it's going to be different conditions. I don't know if that's necessarily going to play into this uh, impact or play into the game's outcome that much, but it is just something to, keep in the back of your mind. Now, moving over to our final game of the wild card weekend, we have Vikings at Rams. Now, this game, it's not actually in Los Angeles.
Yeah.
Obviously, our thoughts and prayers go out to everyone in Los Angeles right now with the wildfires. This game will be taking place in Arizona, however. Vikings are 2.5 point favorites. They are 14-3 on the year. Rams are 10-7. This game Monday, 8 p.m. Eastern time. Minnesota has won 9 of their last 10 games. The Vikings have allowed just 93 rushing yards per game, which is the second fewest in the NFL. And obviously, Kyron Williams has been one of the best running backs in the NFL. He's been a main reason why the Rams are even in this, playoff situation where they are right now. And if the Vikings are able to contain Kyron, that completely changes the course of this game. The Vikings have 33 takeaways this year, which is tied for the most of any team with the Pittsburgh Steelers. Justin Jefferson, we don't really have to get into it. He's been Justin Jefferson. He's been an absolute like he's been a beast. He's been a crazy, crazy, crazy asset for the Vikings per usual this season. And then Aaron Jones has 5 straight games with at least 75 scrimmage yards. As I mentioned, Rams don't have home field advantage, and they did beat Minnesota earlier this year. I do still have the Vikings coming out on top in this one, though. And Darnold, in his last 8 games, has thrown 18 touchdowns compared to 2 interceptions. He has been on an absolute roll, and this kind of ties back into like what do the Vikings do with McCarthy and Darnold? I think we can agree that they're not moving on from Darnold. The team loves him. He's been absolutely amazing for them, and I think what he does in the playoffs, how he performs in the playoffs, is really going to determine is Darnold a winning quarterback, and I think he can be, and I do think he will at least prove that to an extent in this game.
Matt, I got to start the way you started. Thoughts and prayers with everyone near LA, in LA. Thank you to all the firefighters and essential workers helping to make that situation a lot better than what it is right now. But as for this football game taking place in Arizona, so neutral site, you mentioned it. That the Rams will lose home field advantage, but let's be honest, the Rams don't have that much of a home field advantage, even when they do play in
No, they
SoFi
don't.
Stadium.
Los
Uh,
Angeles isn't a great,
yeah,
atmosphere.
well, they didn't have let's be fair to them, they didn't have a football team, for
Yeah,
20 years, the
true.
Rams were in St. Louis, and, the Chargers were over there in San Diego. Um, so yeah, the Rams are losing their home field advantage. How much does it mean? It moves the line 1.5 points, so not a huge swing there. So I do think it helps Minnesota a little bit. But as for the Rams, I want to take a look up and down their schedule because it's mind-boggling how inconsistent this team is to me. You're talking about a
Yeah,
team that loses to the Chicago Bears. They lost 41-10 to the Arizona Cardinals, 24-18
yeah,
to the Chicago Bears. You win by 5 against the Raiders. You beat the Vikings by 10. You put up 44 on Buffalo Bills and Josh Allen. You
mhm,
win by 10 to the Jets, and really the only reason you stuck in that game was because of how bad Aaron Rodgers played. Matthew Stafford threw two terrible interceptions in that game, and then a muffed punt at the end of that game helped the Rams come out with it. You beat the Cardinals 13-9. And then in one of the more disgusting primetime games you will ever see,
yeah,
they win 12-6 against the 49ers in just an unwatchable game of football. You
yeah,
beat the Saints by 7 and you lose to the banged up Dolphins. So extremely interesting, extremely back and forth teams with the Rams. And meanwhile, when you look at the Vikings, this is a 14-win team that came into the season running with their backup quarterback. So yeah, you mentioned, I mean, how good Sam Darnold has played. Um, but when the lights have been brightest, Minnesota has failed to come through. They lose 31-9 in a game where Jameer Gibbs ran all over their souls for the chance at the number 1 seed. Now they got to go on the road in these playoffs and play uh, in Arizona. And then you also look up and down their schedule. The Vikings beat the Jaguars 12-7. They get swept by the Lions earlier in the game that I'll admit they kept a lot closer. They kept the Jets were able to keep it extremely close in London. They had a chance at a game-winning drive but couldn't come through. And they beat the Titans by 10 and the extremely inconsistent Arizona Cardinals by 1. So both of these teams have their flaws, but the way I see it is just Minnesota has more stars. You're talking
mhm,
about an offense
yeah,
that's coming into this game with Justin Jefferson, with Jordan Addison, with Sam Darnold, who's been in, I think, my pick at the comeback player of the year, and there's no even debating that. You're talking about a running game that's also been extremely successful and a defense that has come in, playing extremely well as well. I think Minnesota is able to take care of business in Arizona, albeit I think this could be a close game depending on how the Rams offense moves the ball. I think Kyron Williams can complement the receiving duo of Puka and Cooper
Cooper
Cup.
Kupp, yeah.
I just don't think it's going to be enough to withstand the duo of Addison and Jefferson for that Rams defense.
Yeah, and before we wrap up, we do have 6 viewers right now watching live on YouTube. This is your last chance to call in. Any final thoughts before we wrap it up?
No, I think this is going to be a great wild card weekend. If you are in the chat right now, send us something. We'll be willing to talk to you. You can call in as well if you'd like to if you'd like to voice your opinions. Um, I think this is going to be one of the more interesting wild card rounds. You're talking about divisional matchups, Steelers, Ravens, a rivalry that's gone on forever. Two underdog quarterbacks, the Broncos and the Commanders, coming out of nowhere to make these playoffs. An MVP candidate, three of them going head to head. The 15-2 Chiefs are going to pick up a bye, but we'll see how they play next week in what'll be an extremely interesting matchup against whoever the lowest seed left in the AFC is. Um, and then I think this is going to be a wild card round with some of the closest matchups. I think there's maybe one like big blowout But I think everything here stays pretty close across the board, maybe with the exception of Chargers Texans. But I think that a lot of these games have the potential to be one score games, maybe even overtime games.
And speaking of Chargers Texans, again, that is the first game taking place. It is 11:30 a.m. right now, so we have exactly 5 hours until that game in Houston. So make sure to stay tuned for that one. And then I think game tonight, Ravens Steelers, is only on Prime. I think I saw that
Yep.
in a commercial. So make sure that you go to Prime for that game. Should be a nail biter. With that being said, can't thank you enough for coming on. I really do appreciate it. For everyone who made it up to this point, I can't thank you enough for watching. We did have some good viewers in this episode. And, you know, should just be a really, really exciting wild card weekend. Definitely
Agreed.
one that I'm looking forward to a lot with my Washington Commanders playing their first playoff game in a little while. Again, I'm Matthew Heiserman alongside Josh Wolfer for your Wild Card Round Highlight Haven NFL Tailgate Show. And as always, we will see you next time.